Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to my channel. For the last two videos that I've dropped on this channel, it's been specifically for the podcast I have, so Reflecting with Abdi podcast, and the newsletter that goes alongside it. But today I wanted to do a different style of video. I wanted to do a video which was more practical and could help a lot of people. In today's video, I'll be discussing, based upon my experience, how you can improve academically as well as how to study. In later videos, I will touch on why it's important that you do study, not just specifically for your exams or for some obligation you have to do in school or anything like that, but rather studying what you enjoy for the sake of becoming a lifelong learner, and why I believe it is essential that you become a lifelong learner. But I will discuss that in other videos. Today, I will be speaking on specifically how to study. So I'll begin. There are a few principles when it comes to studying. I believe the most important principle is active recall. If you come across a piece of learning content, so a textbook that you read or a lesson that you've had in school, how well are you able to recall that information? You'll notice that a lot of the exams, they ask you to simply recall information. And even if an exam is more practical, so let's say an exam doesn't ask you to recall information, but rather apply information. A prerequisite of you applying that information is that you're able to recall the correct information in the first place. So it all starts with being able to recall information. So practically speaking, how will you be able to do this? The first thing that you need to do is learn the content. So let's say that, going back to GCSEs, it's GCSE biology and I have to learn topic 1. What I would do is first I'll try to get the information in my head until I'm able to understand it. So I'll read the textbooks, I'll watch videos until I'm able to understand it. And sometimes there are going to be cases where you're not going to be able to understand it, but the next step will always be crucial. The next step is how you actually remember the information. So for this, you need to actively recall it, which just means you need to test yourself. So you learn a piece of content. You learn that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. You learn that. What you need to do now is to test yourself on that information. You can write up a flashcard and ask yourself, what's the function of the mitochondria in an animal cell? And then on the back of it, right, it's the powerhouse of the cell. Or it's there for respiration, or for whatever topic, for whatever question, you can write it in that style. Alongside this, what you need to do is spaced repetition. So if I taught you right now that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of an animal cell, I taught you that right now, and I was to ask you 3 seconds later, what's the function of the mitochondria in an animal cell? You'll be able to easily recall that it's the powerhouse of the cell. However, if I asked you that same piece of information, asked you the same question, 1 week later, it'll be a lot harder to recall. However, That's where the learning is done. If I ask you 1 week later and you struggle to recall the information, what you can do is, at that point, once I tell you the answer, you will be able to remember it better the second time around. And let's say I ask you 3 weeks later the exact same question. What's the function of the mitochondria in an animal cell? And you can't seem to remember it. And then I tell you the information, I tell you the answer. I guarantee you by the third, fourth, fifth time, you will remember the answer. So the key to being able to recall information, being able to memorize information, which is essentially what you need to do for a lot of different styles of exams, is number one, learning the content and trying your best to understand it. There will be cases, like I said, where you're not going to be able to fully understand the content. However, you still need to, for the sake of your exams, be able to recall the information. And the way that you recall the information is through active recall and spaced repetition. So active recall is by you testing yourself, and this can be done in a different way to the way I mentioned. So I mentioned flashcards, that's a good way. You can also write mind maps. So you can read a chapter in a textbook and then get a blank piece of paper and using a mind map try to write down everything you can remember. And then once you finish that, you can get a different colored pen and write in the information that you missed out from the textbook. That's another example of how you can actively recall information. And once you do the active recall, the next crucial step is the spaced repetition. So if you just learn the content right now, there's no point of testing you on the content right now because you'll be able to recall it with ease. But 1 week later, it's going to be harder. 1 month later, it's going to be harder. So what you need to do is you need to test yourself in that information perhaps a few days or a week later. And if you're able to get it right, then you space out the next time you test yourself even further away. So you got it right now. Test yourself on the same topic 1 month from now rather than a week from now. If you got it wrong, test yourself on the topic sooner. Test yourself the next day. That way, the questions that you get right, you test yourself later on. The questions that you keep getting wrong, you test yourself a lot sooner. That way, you will be able to reinforce and solidify the information that you are aiming to memorize. A practical way that you can do this, and the way that is very commonly done within medical school, is through the use of Anki. So Anki is like a software that you can download, and you can put your flashcards in there and it will automatically set up the algorithm of spaced repetition according to how well you're able to recall the information. So that's a practical way that you can apply this. So that's with regards to memorizing the information. However, when it comes to exams, a very high yield way of studying is doing past exam questions. And this is probably the best way you can study, if it is for the purpose of doing an exam. I will touch on later if you're learning just for the sake of wanting to get a better understanding of a subject. But for the sake of exams, the best way is doing exams, past papers. So what you can do is learn the piece of content, and the way you can learn it is by reading it, asking questions, speaking to your teacher, watching videos on the topic, so on and so forth. And that's the way you can learn the content. And then exam questions are crucial. The more exam questions that you do, So going back to the example of GCSE biology, the more GCSE biology exam questions I do, the likelihood is the better I will do in my actual GCSE exam. So you need to do as many exam questions as you possibly can. And if you're short on time and you're trying to cram, then this will be the most effective way of studying. Now, moving away from exams and now thinking about learning in general, we look at learning now in a different way. The way I've discussed now is how to pass exams, but in a way, learning for exams and learning for the sake of mastery and truly understanding the subject is different things. When you want to learn for exams, you want to be focusing on the most high yield content, the content that you will be tested on the most. And the way that you find out what content you will be tested on the most is by looking at exam papers, the past exam papers, and trying to do as many questions as you can from them. And often you will find that exams follow a principle that's seen in so many different places, and that's the 80-20 principle. So you will find that 80% of the exam questions are to do with the 20% of content that you learn. And this principle applies in many areas of your life. The 80-20 principle. What this means to you practically is you need to focus on the key facts, the most important information, the high yield information. And that's what you need to put all your attention towards. If you're doing exam papers and a style of question continues to come up, or certain topics are being tested more, you need to make sure you know that topic inside out. That way, when it comes to the exam, if you learn the most high yield information, you will be doing very well. However, when we are discussing learning for the sake of mastery, rather than just for exams, the way I want you to learn is different. I want you to think about things from first principle. This means breaking down the topic, breaking down the subject as deeply as you can, continually asking yourself why. So, bringing this to perhaps, once again, biology. Let's say that you learn that red blood cells carry oxygen. Okay. Perhaps for your exams, that's all you need to know. It depends on what level you are at. GCSE, primary, A level, university level, of course, different amount of detail. But let's say for the sake of argument, that's all you need to know for your exams. If we are moving away from the exam mindset and rather focusing on trying to master the subject and truly understand it, the questions I want you to be asking yourself is, why are red blood cells carrying oxygen? Where are they carrying oxygen to? How are they carrying oxygen? What happens if they don't carry oxygen? When do they not carry oxygen? Do they always carry oxygen? And then once you get those answers, keep breaking it down, asking how, why, when. That way you get a true understanding of the subject. And the way that you test yourself to truly see if you actually understand the subject is by explaining it to a child. If you can break down what red blood cells are, why they carry oxygen, where they carry oxygen to, if they always carry oxygen, perhaps details regarding their shape, what they contain. Do they only contain oxygen? More details on their structure. If you're able to break that down, so much so that a child is able to understand that information and explain it back to you in a correct way, then at that point, you have begun mastering that subject. And that is truly the goal when it comes to lifelong learning. That's the level that you want to be getting to. But I want you to also understand that that level of learning, that depth that you would gain from digging deep into those subjects, perhaps might not be the best approach when it comes to exams. So when I want you to think about learning, I want you to split it up into learning for the sake of exams and learning for the purpose of learning, for the purpose of mastery and truly understanding a subject. When it comes to exams, your approach should be different. You should be focusing on the most high yield content, memorizing the most high yield content, and doing as many exam questions as you possibly can. And the exam questions that you do wrong, you make sure to highlight it, go over that topic again, and redo exam questions on this same topic. But when it comes to learning for the sake of learning, for the sake of mastery and truly understanding a subject, your approach needs to be different. There shouldn't be a rush. There shouldn't be this thing of trying to quickly memorize things. Forget memorizing when it comes to that. Try to truly understand it. Try to break it down. Try to gain information from different sources. And try to bring subjects together. If we go back to the example of red blood cells, when we truly get an understanding of it, multiple different subjects come into play. Multiple different subjects. Of course, if red blood cells has to do with biology, but the way that oxygen comes into the red blood cells is by diffusion. So now you're thinking about it in terms of chemistry. And perhaps the way that it travels, now you're thinking in terms of mathematics and physics and its shape. So all these different subjects are now coming together. So that's the difference between just learning for the sake of exams and truly understanding the subject, that level of depth. And that should be what you're aiming towards. But I do want you to make a divide when it comes to this, depending on what your goals are. And also to do with the time that you have available. So if you are someone that's watching this and you are in year 7 and you're learning about science for the first time, I want you to be thinking about it in terms of breaking it down, in terms of trying to learn from it from first principles, asking lots of questions, asking why, asking how, asking when, asking what it is. But if you're 1 week away from your GCSE exams, that approach is not really going to be applicable to you at that moment. What you need to be doing is flashcards and exam questions. And that's the approach that you should have when it comes to your learning. So I think I will end it for today with regards to this video. I do want to touch on learning and the academic side because I do have experience, because I'm a tutor and a medical student. So that is something that I can bring value to with regards to people trying to perhaps going into university or in university and they want to learn. So inshallah we'll be making videos like this, but I think I will call it for today. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope that you found this beneficial. Salam.